Rise up to reimagine. When do we find time to dream? When do we really get the chance to flex our imagination and practice long-term thinking, to look into the future and imagine where we could go, or to look into the past to reconnect with what has been lost? Where do we make space to reimagine ourselves and ways we could live differently, to move into new relations with those already around us or those who may think differently from us? When does our imagination run wild, to reimagine our environments, the places we live, and the land that holds us? The first question that we're going to explore today is that I'm going to ask each of you to share a time when you've used the practice of reimagination to bring about something particularly beautiful in this world. And so I'm going to start with Cindy, if you're happy to go first.
Sure. Well, I've been working for a few years really on reimagining education. What if we enabled human beings to think differently, to develop a different relationship with Earth? I think really from the earliest years, I think one of the reasons that we're at this point of crisis is we have told such dreadful stories about Earth and that it's okay to extract to extinction. So this particular project has really been reimagining how we might educate the rising generation. And I'm not the only person doing it. I founded Planetari as a kind of flag, really, to say, I'm traveling this way, is anybody else coming? And it's just attracted a really lovely community of people. There's people who are already doing this kind of work, but out of it, my own things that I'm producing out of it are sets of resources to enable children to think differently. They're multimedia, some things are hands-on so you can actually play, some things are in the digital space. As I've written a book called Bright New World, which is a beautiful coloured reimagining of what the world might look like if we solved the big problems that we have: transport, fuel, energy, our food system. So each spread is a reimagining of what the world could look like, and then we look at where we're at, and then we look at how we're going to get there. So that's one. I hope it will be beautiful. It's just being illustrated now, a really fabulous illustrator, young illustrator. But all around that, it's just connected me with so many people who are doing the same thing. So that in itself is really lovely, to be connected with other humans who are just determined to live differently here and create, if you like, we're map makers. We're creating, we're trying to define a new direction of travel for humans. So people are doing wonderful things along this road, which is just beautiful and inspiring in itself. Some things are actually tangible and some things are still emerging out of people's heads, but it will be a long journey, but it's a really lovely journey to be on, because you meet people who are determined to think and behave differently, and they carry such wonderful positive energy with them, and they're redefining against a really miserable and destructive story. And the way that's most overcome is by that lived creativity that just produces alternative visions for where we are. And I think that's a really powerful thing, and it's really energizing and really beautiful to be around, to be part of that community. So a lot more I could say, but I think that's probably enough now. Yeah.
Can I ask a question around what you just shared of with your book? What was the process for imagining the reimagining?
Well, it's funny because you do in a way where we learn. You learn so much from this community. A good friend and a wonderful person who I think we all know here. You were in his play, Tom. Jonathan Porritt wrote a book called The World We Made, and he backcast. He wrote it in 2013, and he backcast from 2050. and said, if everything went right from this moment, this is where we could be. And it's a book that does actually work for younger people, but it's aimed at an adult audience as well. And so that's been a huge inspiration behind Planetari, actually. And The Bright New World, I had something quite different in mind for how to tell that story, but the publishers that I'm working with, they said, oh no, we want something that's set in the future, and that shows how wonderful everything can be, and then looks at the journey of how we go there. So it was kind of this amalgam of everybody's ideas that really came out of it. But at the root of it, I think, is really Jonathan's the world we made, and I've created it in a way that is really for really young children. So it's going to be for about 8 to 12. So just really simplifying the language, beautiful illustrations, beautiful imaginative things. This is what it could look like if we get it right. But it's a weaving together of threads that come from different influences in my life and my ecosystem. Really, yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Can you share?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to read your book. I'm excited.
Thank you, Tom.
There's, I guess, in all of the artwork and art practice that I think about, there's a quote by Tony Cade Bambara that says, "The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible." And I think I've been involved in some few different pieces of artwork. One of them you mentioned, which is Love Letters to Livable Future, where we try and reimagine the City of London specifically because it's possibly one of the hardest places to reimagine. Literally the square mile that is the source of so much environmental degradation if you sort of source it back to where the money comes from. And in that project, we spent about 3 years reimagining and really trying to think about what the practice of reimagining looks like. And Zoe Svesden, who is the director, shared this kind of reflexive loop, which is like an infinity sign. And on one side, it's present difficulties, and on the other side, it's future imagining. And so often when we're asking someone to imagine, you get swept back into this side of present difficulties. You're like, okay, so let's reimagine, universal basic income. And you're like, oh, but we can't, because suddenly, imagine how difficult would that be for everyone to do, and what would happen, and suddenly before you know it, you're in present difficulties. So how do we create artwork and processes to allow us to live, a little bit more in the world as it should be, without always having to get the world as it is, sort of to dismantle that. And it's been great because we've created these characters that we know quite well now. So one of my characters is a character called Forde, and they are the president of the tax awards in 2050. And in 2050, people are sort of proud of how much citizen contribution they make. And they declare it on the windows, and there's these tax awards each year. And I think it's important to say that it's not a utopian, it's not a utopic space. It's full of climate refugees and people who have lost families in the floods, but it really does sort of have a cast, almost like a soap opera of people who manage to live in a world where there have been some real structural changes to start to think about how we live together better. So yeah, it's sometimes quite hard to come out of that world because you're like, oh, I'm sure you feel the same. And you're like, and then suddenly you're in the present difficulty space because you spent some time there. But yeah, I think, but I guess there are so many different. I think I spent a lot of time in that space, so that's just one that came to mind.
How do you move through the present difficulties and the personal difficulties to really open up that space of reimagination?
I think it's just allowing a practice of it. I mean, the more times we do it, the more time we're able to. And I think that's something that we don't teach in schools, or we don't enable people to do, that it's a practice. But the other thing, I think there's this quite unhelpful rhetoric that it's a privilege to dream. Only some people are allowed to dream. But it's always been the people who are at the sharp end of things who have had to dream because we've had to, or for whatever reason, so for me, if I'm talking about being non-binary, I've had to dream my way of my gender into this world. Or if I live in a community where is an ethnic background that isn't represented, I've had to dream my way into how I can live in this world that I'm not reflected in as much in the books and in the stories that I read. And so I think that it's important to be like, we're always dreaming and we're always having to do that work, and that it is available to us. We just need to start to shift the way that we think about dreaming, I think.
I love that, the breaking down of this like notion that dreaming and reimagining like happens in these moments of perfection, and that, you know, it's like when everything's perfect and then you can sort of sit and like be like, oh, okay, what's next? But actually it always happens in amongst the difficulties, the challenges, the struggles, and that actually they can really propel us into using our imagination because we want something different.
Definitely.
Izzy, can you share an example with us?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely relate to the whole, like, imagining sort of your gender expression or your gender into existence, but I think a lot of the work I do, especially around fashion, is like, okay, this is the world I want to live in. How do we go now to try and create that world without compromising on, no, this is the world I want to live in? A few years ago, I created the campaign Who Made My Pride merch, which is about looking specifically at pride merchandise that comes out at rainbow washing and at LGBT garment workers who are definitely forgotten. There's a big focus in the fashion world on gender-based violence, which is of course incredibly important to talk about, but I guess it's about imagining the world of I don't want anyone to die for the sake of fashion, and everyone who is working, not just in the fashion industry, but should be paid a fair wage. And this is a world that we want to live in, and this is what we want to create. And I think within that campaign, it's very much in its infancy. Like, there's still a lot of pushing to do, I feel, with it. But I've been meeting so many people who have been so willing to come in and say, okay, I'm going to create art for this, or I want to get involved, or just doing little bits here and there, and it's so inspiring that people are just going, this is something that I want to get involved with. And I think when you start from a place of, this is the world I want to be in, you kind of bring people in with you, and they're like, yeah, okay, I want to get involved in this. There's a future here, rather than focusing on despair, which can be really easy to get swept up in. Like, this is the world now, and it's not all awful. It's pretty beautiful. But some of it's pretty awful, and some of it's pretty bad, and yeah, getting stuck in that. But I think when you go, no, this is the world we want, people go, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to get together and try and work towards that. So working with organizations who are saying, okay, yeah, we focus on gender-based violence, but actually this is something that is missing, and we also want to look at this. I think for me it's like, oh, okay, it fuels the work that I do, because it's like, oh, people are also recognizing it's not just me saying, hello, this is a thing. So yeah.
Can you fill us in a little bit around what's been missing and why Pride merch in particular is an important theme?
Yeah, so a few years ago there were sort of headlines going around about how a few brands were making Pride merchandise in countries where it was illegal to be gay, or in countries where there was a lot of anti-LGBT laws or practices, and it sort of shot up during Pride Month and then disintegrated again. I was looking at it like, oh, okay, this came up and everyone's forgotten about it again, but I'm sure the practice hasn't changed. And so I was like, okay, people have stopped talking about this, but it needs to be talked about, because these companies, especially in the UK and the US, are coming out and going, we support the LGBT community, look at these clothes we're making. And not questioning, okay, but where are these clothes being made, and who is making them, and how are you supporting LGBT people, not just in the UK and the US, where, yes, there are issues, but we have an awful lot of privilege compared to countries where these garments are being made. What are you doing for them? And so that's kind of the main focus of the campaign, is going, okay, you're saying you're supporting LGBT people, but what about your supply chains? We want everyone to be paid fairly. And there's not that much research. There's a lot of research, as I said, in gender-based violence and gender-based oppression within the supply chains. But there's very little on LGBT-based oppressions in supply chains. And what is in there is not good. It's stories of people being fired for their sexuality or being scared to speak out generally people are coming together in a lot of these communities and saying, we deserve better pay, we deserve fair treatment. But if they have another marginalisation, it becomes so much harder for them to come out and say, I also deserve fair pay and fair treatment. So that's the focus of the campaign.
Thank you. And so in this work, you were able to see the issue and then reimagine it and then are working towards it and bringing lots of organisations with you.
Yeah, so a lot of it is focusing in the present, saying, okay, what's wrong? But it's focusing on a future that's saying, no, this needs to change, and it's not something that I want to compromise on. This needs to change.
Wonderful. Lorna, what would you like to share in terms of an example from your own life and work?
Well, as an artist, I think it's your job and your responsibility to be imagining things all the time. But in my practice, I work a great deal with scientists, and I work with predominantly earth scientists, so meteorologists or geologists. Actually, I've got a massive passion for geology. So I'm constantly thinking about reimagining that relationship between what the arts and science, which are seen as these two distinct disciplines, and how on earth we can get these things to talk to each other. And I have a lot to bring to science, just as scientists have a lot to bring to my practice, and we share really similar methodologies. So I'm constantly in this thing of trying to change our culture. Our culture forms our future, right? So if we can change our culture and shift things, we can then have these conversations in a better way that feels like science isn't for these people and academic people, and then arts isn't for these people, these floaty people over here. Actually, they're much more all about culture. But then I suppose in terms of the reimagining, I'm just going to give an example actually of something that I did in my community, because I also think sometimes we do huge campaigns, and I've been involved in lots of big campaigns and big national things, but actually sometimes they're big, right? And they're quite hard to get your head around and very hard to maintain, or the energy around social media or something. So I do stuff in my community, and I see it as 100 people, 100 properties on my street, basically, in a couple of roads just veering off my street in a cul-de-sac. And earlier this year, we had COVID really badly in January, and felt pretty dreadful. And also all the galleries and the museums and the theatres were closed. Everything was shut. And as an artist, that's my whole career, is working with people and in communities. And I felt really gutted that everything was closed. So I made out of an old bit of cupboard, a notice board for my front driveway. And I said to people in my community, would anybody like to display your artwork? It's just going to be a temporary gallery while everything's closed. Let's reimagine what a gallery could be if you're all the artists on the street. Because you're all artists, right? Everybody's an artist. You can all imagine things. You can all make a picture, all of that. This is also, I hadn't really engaged with the Grayson Perry's art club, but I think some of the stuff he was doing was related to this. But anyway, I had no idea about that. So I was just like, right, I flyer my street, and I was just like, please all put artwork in. There's a gallery up. You don't have to ask my permission. You can just open the thing, open the windows. So I made this thing, was still kind of struggling with, not feeling great. Stuff started to appear in the gallery, and then literally over the course of, until the galleries opened again on the 17th of May, we had hundreds of pieces of artwork from our street, then the rest of my town, Christchurch in Dorset. Then we also had poets sending artwork or sort of poems from New York, and international artists like Richard Dedamenici sending his knit coin thing that he'd made, or we had people I've obviously got lots of artists over the country that was kind of sending stuff, but the most valuable bit for me was actually people on my road, somebody that knitted me some chickens. And because I changed the week, so I did themes, so every couple of weeks I'd have pet week, or we'd have plant life. And we'd just sort of see this thing that evolving as a kind of collaborative project. And there were kind of an environmental theme or different things, actually. It was really cheerful. I'd get people to suggest. But in terms of the community feeling of making something together, I do community organise on my road anyway, but reimagining what a community is and what we can co-create rather than the top-down thing. I mean, I think there should be an artist in residence in every town, just a scientist in residence in every town. Like, people should be talking about, to make those relationships. We have this great street for that now, and it's not a massively affluent street. You know, it's not a street you might think of has that kind of identity, but now we care about each other through lockdown, through the things we've done over lockdown. We did a cloud gazing fortnight. Everybody was out on the street looking at the clouds, making me cloud artwork, and it was very, very beautiful. So I think some of those smaller projects that are actually really easy. There's now, I think, 3 other notice boards in the country that people just got in touch and said, oh, could we do that on our road? I do not own this. I do, like, yes, go for it. I will share the themes. I'll share anything I can help you with. And there's a more beautiful than me, because they didn't just chop down a bit of cupboard they found down the tip. But great, like, wonderful. And it was just the power of you just doing something, thinking, well, how can we reimagine an art gallery? Because I'm a bit sad everything's closed. It's actually, it's kind of easy. Yeah. People run with it. Like, it's powerful. And just the act of almost putting a piece of paper through a door and giving permission, it just changes the world. It really does. So it's personal, small thing. It's not like the big stuff I've done, but you change people's lives in that way.
Love that. And there's a lot of smiles in the room that everyone's an artist and everyone that can contribute. I saw something in Hackney once where everybody was invited to turn their windows into art, and there were different themes, and basically it was an exhibition through that part of the neighbourhood, and they were all so different. People just used that window space and they put something out there, and then as you walk through, it really brought to life, and it brought this personality and conversation and connection and expression, and it's really powerful.
There's something about valuing each other's artwork and effort, and that's a very powerful thing you can give to people with your enthusiasm, and then it's this beautiful circle of people reflecting that back to each other. It's super powerful.
Amazing. Tom, you mentioned about having to kind of reimagine yourself, like, in the world, and I guess this kind of personal reimagining that we've all had to do at different points in our lives. And I used to work in sustainable fashion for a number of years, and I think around about that time, 10 years ago or so, Vivienne Westwood said something to the lines of, everyone is so boring, they're all dressed the same now, like fashion's dead. And it's just really nice being here in person, where you can see below the hips what people are wearing, unlike on Zoom. And just to see that we're sat here and everyone's dressed very differently, everyone's expressing themselves in a different way. And that when you open up the theme of imagination and creativity into your life, that it's in every aspect, and that same ability to just, you know, to reimagine what you might wear one day is the same. It's the same skill of being able to reimagine how our world could be different. And so I wonder if anything's alive for any of you around that you want to share more about. Yeah, personally reimagining your life and how something has changed in your personal life through reimagining.
I was just saying that it's hard though, because it is scary. Like, you know, like Lady Gaga says, you can change your hair, you can change your life, and you know, it's kind of twee, but it's also kind of amazing. The idea that, you know, you have a breakup and you like cut your hair, and it's actually like wildly empowering. But for anybody who's trans or gender non-conforming to like step out on the street and wear something that challenges the norms, it's hard. And you know, that reimagining, I don't know, maybe just think about lockdown and like how somehow maybe in our streets or in our homes that there's a relationship to maybe feeling like safer possibilities to reimagine. And I wonder if we are going to think about this reimagining as coming from a place where we start from being and reimagining ourselves and the world, how do we create safer spaces in order to do that, which allows us to then to reimagine, a world beyond some of the kind of structures that we struggle with at the moment. And I know it doesn't really maybe answer what you're saying, but there's something around it being difficult.
Yeah, can I carry on from that point? Because I'm thinking about the whole, how so many people I've seen have sort of come into themselves gender-wise over lockdown. And I think with me, because I knew I was non-binary a long time ago, but over lockdown I got so much time to myself without the gender expectations of the world to go, okay, this is who I am and this is who I want to be. And I definitely noticed when I came out of lockdown, getting gendered in certain ways and spoken to in certain ways, that it was like, oh yeah, this is an alien concept to me, because I've been in my own little world for the last year and a half, allowed to express myself. And what we were talking about, safe spaces, I found so many new, since lockdown, so many new queer spaces to sort of exist within. And it gives so much space if there's people there saying, you can exist as whoever you are, and we're just here to support you as you are. And having those spaces where people support you sort of unconditionally and say, yeah, you exist. If that changes, that's cool. If it stays the same, that's cool. Gives so much space for people to, reimagine themselves. And I think unless you have that space to reimagine yourself, it's really hard to reimagine outside of yourself.
So I'm hearing that one aspect that's important is having that quiet time away from the world, not necessarily another pandemic, but just, not going out so much, so that you stay in and you have time with yourself to really notice how you feel and to let go of how you're perceived, and to find what's within. And then the other aspect is having really good support in the people around you in order to allow you to reimagine yourself. And there's always that thing that I remember that sometimes in relationships, I don't know if any of you ever have heard that thing of you've changed. It's kind of like one of those, dating kind of lines that's there in the zeitgeist. And you're like, well, yes, of course. We're gonna keep finding new identities. We're gonna keep reimagining ourselves. And in any relationship, you would hope that people would do that together and separately, and that we're always kind of holding this space for reimagination. And so to be able to do that with the people in our lives, and especially families where it can be the most difficult to witness people change, that then allows this kind of the building of the muscle that then allows us to kind of look into the bigger, wider picture and reimagine there and allow things to change as well. And I'm reminded as well of the kind of, the sort of, the kind of very typical British sort of well, it's always been this way, so it always will be this way kind of mentality, and how that's not relevant at all anymore, but how that takes a cultural shift, and then that cultural shift has to happen through culture. It has to happen through art, through science, through spirit, whatever the means are. Does anyone want to add anything there?
Well, I think I'd like to pick up on the point that Tom made earlier about if you don't fit in, if you're born in a marginal place, you really have to reimagine your life, because the story that the world tells you is so ghastly through films, cinema, children's books, children's toys. So, as a spirit, you, from a very early age, and I'd say from about 4 years old, I just realised there's just no way this world is one that I can live in. I'll have to completely reimagine my own life, and in a way, I think in some ways it's I don't know. It's a difficult blessing, but it is a blessing, because you're already reinventing the world. You're already, from a really early age, knowing that that's not a world that I want to be part of. So you're already thinking, how else could the world be? And I'm a mixed race person, and that's you live in a really strange place. It's a kind of world between worlds. And there's terrible prejudice. You encounter terrible prejudice. But actually, the communities of friendship that build around you are really strong and really beautiful, because particularly when I was born, you're stepping over at people who are prepared to step over that line and be part of something that doesn't conform. So it really is it can be a very powerful thing as well. And sometimes you meet people who wake up to that much later on in their lives, because in a way it looks like, oh, this world is for me, I should find my place in this. I've been told that this is the road that I'm on, and I fit all these stereotypes or these images that I see, and then people wake up much later to something that actually this is not a world that I feel comfortable in at all, and they have to reimagine themselves and reimagine where they can belong at a much at a later stage in their life. So I think it is for me, certainly, as growing up, and I have a beautiful sister who I absolutely love. We just invented a whole world for ourselves in our attic. And I had a real shock when we had to go out into the real world. But it gives you that strength and that sense of what is possible, and it's so alive and strong in our heads that we could carry it with us. And little by little, you do make the world around you fit you and who you are. There was absolutely no way I was going into a conventional job. That just the thought of it just sent chills down my spine. That was the no-go zone, in a place you couldn't be. And so it's hard living with marginalisation and alienation around you all the time, but it does give you a strength. And it is so important, as you say, to have those, Izzy, the communities around you where you feel safe, because that's where the self can grow. And it wasn't me, it wasn't that thing out there that told me I was invalid. It was this thing in here that tells me who I am, and this community of wonderful people who said yes, let that spirit live and go into the world. So yeah, I think it's a really reimagining your life. I'm sure we all do it, but when it comes as a necessity, I think there's huge strength there and power, actually, despite all the pain that I'm sure that everybody has experienced. But yeah, so to be recommended, I would say.
Thank you, Cindy. Can we all come to the attic?
It's really interesting to me in terms of making art or making imagination and those imaginative leaps, that I think in our heads we have this idea of like an artist in the garret and dreaming with this, I don't know, clean sheet of paper and kind of doing some fabulous drawing or something that's completely separate from the world. And that's what in my head I probably think of somebody imagining something. And for me, I'm a mum of 2 kids. We've got a very busy home life, not a massive house. All of these things come out of the chaos of life. Or if there's a barrier I'm hitting, that's when I get imaginative. So it's exactly as you're saying. It's really, I've never thought about it in those terms before, but actually the power of adversity or chaos, or actually I make best with other people. Like I'm sat in a room with amazing people and my brain's already firing of ideas, or they're the inspiring things, or when I'm working with a community or when I'm asking them questions, that's when I'm at my most imaginative. Actually, it's the collaborative process. And I think that's a really interesting thing about imagination. It's not this kind of genius model where I don't know, white man with big hair kind of in lab coat kind of gets to make this great discovery somewhere. Actually, that's generally, I don't think this is not how science works. I don't think it's how art works. It's not how imagination works. So it's a collaborative effort. I feel sort of, I don't know, my thoughts have never quite catalysed in that way about it, but hearing you speak about it too, it's like, yes, that's how it works. It's a group effort.
I love that. And as we connect kind of back out into the bigger picture, I'm reminded of when I started The Future is Beautiful in 2010. It was called Think Act Vote then, and it was in a kind of reaction to UK politics and it being an election year. And I had been someone that thought that working in Westminster politics was a way forward for me to be able to bring a vision of the future alive. And the moment that died for me, although I kept trying for a number of years, was when somebody said to me in a pub in Westminster, your problem, Amisha, is you care too much about people to do well in politics. And I was like, I'm in the wrong place. And in 2010, I thought, I'm not excited about this election. I don't believe anymore that this vote is going to lead to the future that I choose, the world that I want to live in. And so I created this ballot box and made these voting cards that said the future I choose is ... and then started to engage in a conversation around what is the future that you choose, and to ask people to have a vision, a bigger vision of the world. And what was amazing about it was most people didn't feel like they had permission to have that vision. And I think that that's something that's changing definitely in the last 10 years because of desperation around what's happening now, and seeing that our priorities as humans are not being met, and not just our priorities as humans, but our care for all the other species and the plant species, the modern human world. And so then that's really igniting that fire of imagination for more and more people to be thinking, well, what is the future that we choose? How can we create it? And how can we inspire each other to be living it? Because it's not something that we can do on our own. And I'm really curious to hear what is it that you feel most needs to be reimagined in this world? And why? What's kind of firing you up around where we can bring some more collective imagination, reimagination?
That's an interesting one. I think we have to, I think you're absolutely right. People don't feel they have permission. And I think there's just so much, there is some kind of retelling that needs to happen before people will be able to open up and feel it's a safe and a valuable place to reimagine. There was a superb article in the Guardian a couple of days ago, which was by George Monbiot. It was just blisteringly brief about, he was trying to tell the world history in a few paragraphs, but the model that, what has happened, and it is crude, you've had 500 years or more of rampant colonization of most peoples. People went out and were legitimized to do the most awful things to other people, with the genocides, in all the colonies, North America, South America, Africa, slavery, and then all the wars, which are told in such heroic ways, were basically the European nations who were fighting over these new colonies, and that's what the wars were fought over. And all of this has had to be myth-made into something that makes it honourable and noble, and that still is what perpetrates our stories today, from the earliest days in school to the films, the storytelling, the Hollywood machine that has created that myth of America on the base of the most brutal genocide, absolute wiping out of people and then bringing other people in to be totally dehumanized, and billions and billions of dollars are spent on maintaining those stories in place, and anybody who doesn't fit the norms, whether it's your race, whether it's your gender, is the roles that they're given have been so atrociously dehumanized that it's very hard when you say that people don't have permission. Even if you speak out in school about this, an incident in my daughter's school very recently when a couple of children tried to speak out, you feel the weight of the system just crushing you. Even in this day, it's so hard. So I'm sure everybody in this room is so capable of reimagining a different type of world, but it feels like this old, ugly story is just sitting there and crushing us, and it's so important, I think, that we have to find ways of retelling our past in a much more truthful way to enable us to be able to reimagine a brighter future. Tom?
Yeah, no, I just made me think that, I love that. So I was going to say that the idea of reimagining land, and the idea of reimagining a future, but also being honest about our past. And in some of the work I do, I try and start with a land acknowledgement, which we don't have in this country, which is wild given it's the largest aggressor of colonial violence in the world, and yet in other countries, which also are like Canada or Australia, you know, at the beginning of every primary school day in Canada, they start a land acknowledgement, which acknowledges what the land was before it was colonized. So try to find one here. And I wrote this piece, and it sort of talks about acknowledging colonial violence of Britain, you know, the fact that people are here and this room looks like this room looks because of colonialism, and like, what do we do and how can we make sure that we're, you know, just creating equitable systems that allow for, and what it means to be in the place for people who is also the place of like historic colonial violence. Anyway, I wrote this thing. My friend, who was really big in the Kurdish freedom fighting movement, big, that's a ridiculous word, but she did a lot of work in the Kurdish freedom fighting movement. Does that sound such like a celebrity? But anyway, she was like, it's so bleak. She's like, you can't start something like this when it's that bleak, because this is true, but then what? And so she wrote this response, which was talked about us as stewards of this land. And every time I read something about, you know, acknowledging colonial violence, she was like, and also we remember the people that resisted. And for me, it's this tension of being like, how are we honest about the history to reimagine humanity and to challenge the way we dehumanize people, particularly, you know, just thinking about migration stories and refugee stories at the moment, and start to give something in return, like a new form of not patriotism, not nationalism, but like stewardship of this world, that we care for the land that we belong on. And we have, I just feel so ashamed of like British history. And as someone who's from an immigrant background, I don't have that much relationship to British history. So, but that's not a great place to reimagine from. There are, you know, we are on this land, on these islands. So we need to steward it and start to think about ways in which we can have strength to do it, and not just what I was doing, I think, which was just being like, it's all been shit.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, I think there's a kind of traumatizing. I don't think it's just the people, you know, who have looked like victims of the colonial violence. It's the people who had to live with a system that perpetrated it, because you have to dehumanize yourself to accept that what's going on is okay. And I think there is some kind of collective shutting down that has to happen for you to get up every morning and live complicitly with something that you know really subliminally is so destructive and harmful, and has been over such a long period of time. So it doesn't entirely follow from what you've said, but it is that. You know, it's such a deep psychological thing that's kind of happened to all of us, and understanding that collectively, I think, is the key to, you know, so somebody can step out of the role of having to lie about your history because it's going to make you look so bad and your family looks so bad. It happened to you too, kind of thing. And I do think that needs to be, you know, we need to get to a place that we can talk from the collective trauma, really, of the last 500 years. And you know, there's been wonderful things, wonderful art, wonderful civilizations that, you know, stretch back, you know, far further than that. There's been brutality back far further than that. But I think there does need to be some collective acknowledgement of what has happened to all of it that has now brought us to the edge of extinction. You know, we're all facing this together, and you know, still at COP26, you see these people desperate to maintain business as usual, and they'll peddle out the half truth or the blatant lies. But until we can say you don't have to do that anymore, there's nothing. You don't have to hold this system in place anymore. Let's let go of that. Acknowledge what's happened to us, and then I think we can. And it's, you know, it sounds very idealistic, but we can reimagine together what our world, our shared planet, our tiny little pale blue dot that we turn around on could look like. You know, it feels that it's so deep where we need to go to draw the strength from to bring something new out in a large way. I mean, there's in our individual lives there's a lot that we can do, but that feels like something that lives in the collective psyche of humanity in a way.
Yeah, when you first said, what do you like to reimagine, my brain went, am I allowed to say the entire system? And it's like, yeah, I am allowed to say the entire system, because the last 500 years and even further back than that has led us to the system where the majority of humanity work 40+ hour weeks, getting paid barely enough to live, to produce stuff to make a few people rich. Who does that serve? Does that serve humanity as a whole? No. What can we do to actually serve humanity? What world do we want to live in where we don't? Because right now I'm trying to find a way that I can work and survive and live where I'm not completely miserable with what I'm doing, like where I have a life that I enjoy and that I want to live. And I think it feels bad that is a privilege, that I'm sat here going, oh, I can actually think about these things, but it shouldn't be. Everyone should be able to live a life that serves them and does serve humanity. And I don't think that the majority of people do right now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, they were all so inspiring, all your comments. And there's so much to take from everything. Like it's. I want to reimagine the system as well. I want to smash the patriarchy. I want to, because that's disincentive. It's awful for men as well as it is for women. And there's all these problems. But I think in a really practical thing, the thing that I'd really like that is possible in the near future is reimagining our relationship with nature. And Satish spoke really beautifully last night about everybody being a gardener. Satish Kumar spoke, and that was, that practical thing, like just find a patch of earth, find something to plant. That's really powerful, because I can do that. I can do that tomorrow, and I can do that Monday morning when I go home. I can find that. There is also a massive issue with access to the countryside. I'm really lucky. I live in sort of suburbia, but we're on the edge of rurality. I'm in Dorset. I can get to the coast, I can walk there, I can see landscape, I can observe sedimentary layers in the rock. It's extraordinary. We moved from a sort of estate in Essex when I was 7, and we moved to Dorset, and it was like moving into Technicolor. Suddenly you see the rock in a different way, and the sky and the clouds, like it's had a profound impact on me for my life. And I think that's it could be the same for everybody. And that's why I make my work about the planet and the beauty of nature. But there are so many people, particularly in urban environments, and particularly people of colour, that do not have access to landscape or even urban parks. And that breaks my heart. And there is a big push at the moment with like the national AOMBs and national parks, trying to make sure that people know they have access to nature, that they can have, as a child, a night outside under dark skies. These things give us that sense of custodianship that we need to have, that we need to be able to have this relationship with nature, to be able to protect it. So that's what I'd most like to reimagine. That's actually practical. It's really possible in the very near future. How can we have these? There's piecemeal stuff. There's some schools are really good at having nature gardens, and other schools don't have that or don't have access to the funds. Actually, some amazing growing gardens in London schools, because they've had lots of funding for many years. So there's this piecemeal attitude. It needs to be national, and it's all over the country. Let's reimagine this relationship with nature, particularly starting with our children, but through everybody. And that feels doable now.
Thank you, Lorna. You've hit a nerve of something that I've been really contemplating a lot recently, because I've had the benefit during the pandemic of being somewhere where it's really safe for me to be outside late at night. Living in a small village, there's not been many people in the village that I don't know. There's a beach, and it's right outside where I've been, so I've just been able to walk around late at night under the moon and under the stars, and feel really safe, not looking over my shoulder, just being there and experiencing nature. And we are lunar beings as well as solar beings, and that part of the night skies and how that affects us. We're so affected by the moon cycles and the tides and the water that is in our bodies that's affected by the moon. And especially for women, the moon cycles connect to our menstrual cycles, and to live in a culture where it's often not safe to be outside at night. A night could be 5 o'clock in the winter, and that where you're having to kind of rush through and look over your shoulders, and and not be able to just be in that space of connection. And yeah, I feel like it's one of those things that I feel like, gosh, if we could just change that somehow, what would that do to our collective imagination? What would happen if all of us were able to stargaze more, to sit out under the moon, and to be with what comes through our creative knowing and our intuition, our imagination through the night. But as that's not safe for all of us, cloud gazing is more safe. Can you share more about that as a practice and how you've experienced it being experienced and what it opened up for you?
So I cloud gazed from being quite little and with my nan, and we'd sit in the back garden and look up. And it's also a really handy metaphor for thinking. You know, we draw a thought bubble, we draw a dream or a thought, and it's that idea that this is a very slippery, beautiful metaphor that can encompass lots of things, being a cloud gazer. But also with that science head, the idea of then kind of bringing in the science of climate change, of change. Clouds are constantly mutating, they're changing from one thing into another. The average life expectancies of a cloud is just 10 minutes long. And so the idea that we could talk about change using this really helpful metaphor of the sky, but also asking my audience to be outside and engage with the universe and the troposphere as it's happening in real time. I always say that, so it's a headphone piece. You lie on the giant beanbag and make you cozy with blankets, and you wear sunglasses and you look up. It's 25 minutes long. I used to perform it myself in real time. It's a live performance, and now it's headphones. So the idea is a bit like I'm kind of lying next to you and whispering in your ear. And the idea was to make something that was about climate change, but wasn't using this terrifying word climate change, which neurologically kind of might inhibit you. And certainly for some audiences, makes you, 6 years ago when we were making, Heidi and I were making the piece together, actually people were still saying, is that even a thing? Which was like, oh. So you're immediately in conflict, but actually because I make work for the street, it's free at the point of entry, you might have that conversation quite a few times. I just wanted to avoid that conversation. So I spoke with a neuroscientist who said, don't use the word climate change at all. So you talk about change preparedness, the idea that change is part of being a human, and using the sky. And I also think of the clouds, every time it's performed, it's completely different, because although the audio changes once a year, sometimes in a year I change it, but the text might change, but mainly it's the sky that's the star performer, and that is always changing. And we've done it in conditions of absolutely torrential downpour, awful weather conditions, it's a show about the weather, to like beautiful cumulus skies that are changing all the time, to we've only ever had one day where there's been no clouds at all, and it was at Milton Keynes International Festival earlier this year. But even then you can just look at the troposphere and how extraordinary it is, how it's light at the base and dark at the top. And part of the reason that I changed from performing it live for myself to putting it onto headphones was because the conversation afterwards then happens, and you can talk to people about their own journeys in the sky. And I end up quite often in tears with people when they tell me about, like, maybe their dad that, you know, they went on a journey with. I have a human story in Cloudscapes about me and my dad driving the Route 66 together. And because there's an inherent contradiction, I was making a piece about climate change where I, for his 66th birthday, drove the Route 66, but I had to get a long haul flight in order to do that. There's these tensions in real life as a human that make things problematic like that. So I suppose it's a kind of multi-layered piece, which is actually really simple, which is really about just kind of lie down, commune with nature, connect with each other, look up at the sky, have a think, maybe fall asleep, like lots of people fall asleep. And I feel like in a childish way that I've won a bit, because I've made somebody feel so relaxed in public space that these ideas have drifted into their heads, that there's a liminal kind of thing going on that's really contemplative and maybe also giving them space to imagine something or think about the world in a different way. And then to have a chat afterwards, and then I learn stuff as well. So it's not it's a two-way relationship. There's a communication there. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
It's a beautiful experience. I was one of those that fell asleep just earlier and woke up feeling renewed and with a completely different perspective. And so, yeah, powerful piece. And please do go and check it out. It's there till 4 and it's there tomorrow as well.
You mentioned, Lorna, this thing of the inherent tensions of maybe where our visions are, maybe what we have reimagined, and maybe what we're actually living, because we are part of all of these systems that are not perfect. And so we're often having to contradict our own vision. And I wonder, and when I say often, I mean all the time, we're having to contradict our own vision of what's possible. And I wonder, how do you deal with that? And how do you kind of keep the vision alive even when you're breaking it yourself?
I think that like guilt and shame are like a really, really powerful tool for like capitalism to win. Because it centers the individual. Like guilt means, I've done a bad thing, or shame means I am bad. And in that moment, we're centering ourselves in that. And so it's a real smokescreen. So there's a real incentive, I think, for people to make you feel guilty, to make you feel shameful. There's a reason why people are being told not to use plastic, but they're not lobbying, companies to pay a tax for who make the plastic. So, there's incentive amongst capitalism and consumerism for it to be about the individual. And so, is it Kelly you were saying? You think, I want to know how to do more. And I think there's this idea that we're never doing enough. There's so much we can do. But actually, I think one of the most important things we could do is move away from a space of guilt and shame and thinking, actually, where do I sit in the movement ecology? I work for an organization called Neon. We think about how to build movements, social movements. And it's probably the model that I'm, think about the most. And it's the idea there's different parts of the movement ecology. There's personal empowerment, which is about which is really about the past. It's about healing some of that trauma we were talking about. It's about making sure that we're able to create enough sustenance and look after ourselves to exist. And then we have the building alternatives, which is the art practice, the dreaming, the thinking about the future. And then there's the one we think about all the time, which is the challenging the dominant institutions, which is, the thing that we think about when we think about change. But, like you were saying, having some relationship to land and creating a space or the notice board, that kind of space of building an alternative is such a valid part of that ecology. And as soon as we start damning that, you were in Parliament, you're like, oh, this is not a way to make change. And it's a way to make change. It wasn't like the right way necessarily for you to make change. But we have this idea that there's this one way, and actually all of these things need to start speaking to one another in order to be able to move forward. And yeah, I don't really know how that ended up there, but
I want to just throw my hat off to those that are in Westminster politics and are making change. Because there are people, but you just have to have be made up of something slightly different to what I'm made up of, which is what I discovered. And so part of it is, how do we find our place where we can most use our creativity, our skills, our ways of being to reimagine and create change.
I am. Sorry, I can't remember where I started from. Oh, I remember. A lot of the work that I do, because I sort of started as a blogger and was started on my own journey of individual change, which kind of led to this looking at systems change. I interact with a lot of people who are just starting the journey and going, okay, how can I help? Which then leads to, I suppose, looking at the bigger picture. And both individual and collective change are both as important as each other. They're sort of intermingled. But I have so many times I say to people, look, be prepared to sit there and go, I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I'm doing everything wrong, because you will come to that point over and over and over again because of this, as you're saying, because of the system that we live in. And I think more recently I've tried to get into this space of guilt and shame are not helpful emotions, but they're very natural emotions.
Yeah.
And trying to just sit with those uncomfortable feelings. And one thing that I think we all have done, or I used to do a lot, is put shame on the shame. It's sort of like, oh, I feel bad, and now I feel bad because I feel bad, because I can't get my work done, and I can't do all these things that I want to do, and you kind of make the bad feeling even worse for yourself, and you enter this spiral of, oh, I feel awful, and I feel awful because I feel awful, and I can't do anything. And so I've been recently really trying to break that cycle, and sitting and going, okay, I feel bad right now, I don't feel good, I feel guilty or shame or whatever feeling I'm feeling about whatever it is that's happening, and just going, okay, that's how I feel, we're just going to sit through this, we're just going to sit with it. It's not nice, it's not comfortable, but I'm not going to sit there and shame myself for feeling shame, because then, as you said, capitalism wins. The system wins. You just, I think it's really difficult, but just feeling your feelings and going, this is what I'm feeling right now, that's okay, that makes sense. We're going to move through it and we're going to carry on, rather than putting labels on things. I still label things. I'm like, okay, I feel shame right now, but then not going the further step of, oh, and now I feel guilty because I feel guilty. So I think learning to stop yourself and going, I'm feeling feelings, and that's natural and that's normal and that's fine and it will pass. As you said, like with the clouds, it's kind of like that. Your internal emotions and body are constantly changing all the time. And I think recently, on a more personal level, I recently entered into a polyamorous relationship, which has been a big change in my life. But within that, I've been feeling two complete opposite emotions at the exact same time. And it's been really scary sometimes, but also really beautiful, because I'm like, I'm feeling this really intense euphoria about one situation, but I'm also feeling really uncomfortable and unsettled by this other one. And I think recognizing those two emotions and being like, I can feel both of these things at the same time, and I can feel them about different people in very similar situations, and just sitting with that and being like, yeah, this is life, this is what it's like to be a human, and just allowing yourself to feel feelings, I suppose, is my point there.
I think that's it. We just live in a paradox, and you have to accept that. And I think it's really important to do that. Otherwise, you can beat yourself up about everything. And I think that you just have to put that aside. And I love that phrase: "Keep your eyes on the prize." That it's the overall arching change or vision that you're looking to. And we are just caught up in a system that isn't of our own making. You can go and live. I did actually. I lived on a tiny little island in the middle of the South China Sea, but you're still connected. And I think that's when I was much younger. I think now it is just about acknowledging that we cannot and will not change the system overnight, but trying to making ourselves feel bad about it just disempowers ourselves. I think we have a right to enjoy our lives as well, and feeling guilty because you've done something that was fun and enjoyable and you didn't probably live up to this incredibly severe moral code of what you should and shouldn't do. I think that you have to allow yourself to live and enjoy life. And I think if people who are seeking change, we're talking about systems change here as well, if people become so sanctimonious about what you can and can't do and virtue signalling, it's just not anything that's going to bring people with us, and it's not a nice way to live. So I think allowing yourself to be human, enjoying yourself, and acknowledging what you can and are doing, rather than trying to be this perfect, floating on water. Because I just don't know anybody like that, except people have tortured themselves so much inside that they've become ineffective, really. So live your life for sure.
Thank you. I've had a kind of chronic guilt issue since I was a child, and always felt it connected to maybe having privilege that I had seen many others without, but like from a child, really, really strong. And I was talking last night to Satish Kumar about it, and he reminded me that there's no word for guilt in Indian languages. So in Gujarati, Hindi, Sanskrit, there is no word for guilt. We didn't get onto shame. Pretty sure there's no word for anxiety either in those languages, from what he said, which also made me go, okay, so the guilt is a colonial capitalist concept. It's not something that was there in my ancestors, because it's not. There's not even a word for it. It's not in the language, and so then you're like, wow, okay, well, yeah, I can let that go then.
I love that.
And no need to carry it forward. As we are coming towards the end of our time together, for all present here at Change Festival, and for all that are listening to this at home at some time in the future, I would love for each of you to share something on how do we rise up to reimagine. And after you've shared, also share how we can connect with you further. So your website and your social media, how you'd like to be contacted to deepen the weaving and the conversations. Cindy.
Gosh, I'm stuck on the spot here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'll stop doing
No,
that.
it's absolutely
Lorna.
fine. I'm fine. I just think, because I'm getting to the end of the time, I think it's, it's about compassion, understanding that we all come from a different place, and that we won't carry the same history, they carry the same story. But I think by deeply caring and understanding each other, looking for that humanity in each other is the important place for us to start to work together, to rise up and to reimagine what we can be. So that's what we can do. But I'd be delighted to hear from anybody. I have a website which is called Planetari, www.planetari.world. If you want to contact me, there's a little form on there. And I'd be delighted to hear from anybody who's interested in the journey I'm on about reimagining the world for reimagining stories of Earth for children from their earliest years. I'm working on a number of projects and always happy to collaborate. So yeah, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this audience.
And that's Planetari with an I, not a Y.
Yes, Planetari with an I.
Amazing. Tom.
I'm really taken what you said, Cindy, about the attics. And so I think that maybe we can rise up to reimagine by, reconnecting with our inner children. I think, when our imagination is always cultivated at that point, then we sort of stop and think that's not when your imagination needs to be cultivated anymore. Or if it is, it's monetized. And you're like, you're an artist, you make money, imagine. You're like, oh gosh. I think that just being able to connect, what is it for you? Is it being with your siblings, or is it being in nature? Or I feel that would do a lot of things to stop people feeling like they've got the answer and getting things right as well. Just on all things, just Tom Ross Williams, that's my website and socials and stuff. So that's how you can connect.
I think for me it's about people and community. Looking at COP26 happening at the moment, what gives me hope and inspiration for your future isn't necessarily the politicians inside who are saying the right words but not necessarily doing the right action. It's the 30,000 people who were on the street yesterday in Glasgow, and however many thousand, hopefully hundreds of thousands who have been out worldwide today. And so I think connect with your community in whatever way you can. As Tom said, whether it's small, whoever brings you that connection, just find it and go from there. And on social media, pretty much everything is Mucky Cloud, so that's MUCCY and then the cloud. That's my website. That's my website and my social media, or you can search the Quirky Environmentalist and you will find me.
Oh, it's huge, and it's a really hard question actually. How do you rise up to reimagine? For me, it is to do it with other people, and sometimes I'm just deeply practical. I think there's an engineer that was never let out at school, and that's why I work with scientists and engineering now, is because this artist actually has a deeply practical background. So sometimes I think maybe finding a problem with others that you can solve together, and reimagine together and collaborate. My Twitter handle is @thegobbledygook. And I'm Gobbledygook Theatre on Instagram, and www.gobbledygook Theatre. My goodness, it was a terrible theatre company name when we chose it. I'm Lorna Rees. You should find me through the Change Festival website as well.
But there's links on the Change Festival website, and we've got links as well on the podcast. From hearing everyone else's, how do you rise up to reimagine? Are there any like, oh, here's a practice or here's a tip that's just bubbling that you want to share from anyone?
Do you know what? That there's a great power in social media that is sometimes terrifying and sometimes deeply brilliant and sometimes really upsetting. And so it's using that in a wise way that you feel when you are able to cope with it. I did something a few years ago that had a huge impact and was on all over national media about my local MP, and it was everywhere. And then there was a kickback with, you know, the kind of horror of like rape or death threats or what have you. But I would say it's a brilliant, wonderful tool for change. But sometimes it can bring you down and make you terrified and make it really tough. So I think it's a good tool, but that's my kind of top tip in terms of social activism. Use it wisely and have people around you that are making you feel safe and valued and that you're okay.
I would also say just dare, really. I think it's time to dare. I think if you've got something that you really want to do, Thomas talked about guilt and shame being a product of the system. So is failure. Who cares if it doesn't work? Who cares if it goes wrong? You'll find something out about yourself. You'll meet all kinds of wonderful people along the way. Just stick your flag in the ground and go for it, I would say. And it will definitely not be the shape that you think it's going. Take the shape you think it's going to be, but something wonderful will happen. So just do it, I really think it's time, and don't hold it. It's time for the planet. If you've got something beautiful to bring it out. And it's always time for yourself. But the only thing that you ever regret is that you didn't do it sooner. So I would just, if you're carrying that thing that you want to rise up and reimagine, just let it out. For sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say on action, because it is very easy to get overwhelmed because there's so much out there, is just pick one small thing that you want to do or that you like and start there. And take it in steps, because sometimes you look at the whole issue and you go, I don't know where to start, I don't know what I'm doing, just one small thing, and then once you've done that one small thing, do the next one and keep going.
That's amazing. I'd like to add a couple of practices of walking in nature with a question, and so something that you might have in your life that you want to reimagine, or something that's in the bigger picture. But especially for things in your life when you're not really sure how to move forward, when you can feel like something's not right, like you've grown out of it, like that there needs to be a different way of being within that situation. Hold it as a question, go for a walk, and don't think about it on the walk. Just hold it there, like in your kind of consciousness, and then see where you're at with that when you get back, because often you're like, oh yeah, what about this? And writing practices can be really, really helpful and powerful too. Just free writing, where you don't read what you're writing whilst you're writing it, you don't think about it being for anyone else, and you just write, and you let yourself reimagine the way that you make money in the world, your relationships, how you live, what you spend money on, all of these key aspects, what you do to express your creativity, or how you're using your hands in the world. And with the bigger picture, we created in our book that was called The Future We Choose, and then the re-edition was called The Future is Beautiful, and you can download it for free on our website. And you can also download these little printouts. You don't need the printouts, but there's the futures interview, and just take some time to answer that question, what is the future that I choose? And then there are follow-up questions around how do we create it? And so you give yourself a guidebook towards creating your vision of the world that you want to live in. And there may be so many things that you want to reimagine. And as you know, you're just one person living in crazy capitalism. And so your time is limited. But doing this process where you imagine that future, and then you bring it down to what's most important to you and that matches your skill set and your time and
whatever it is, the resources that you have available to you, and then choose that and start to live that. And that's how we're going to do this, by all of us doing that and all of us supporting each other. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you to Becky Birchall for all of the amazingness around getting Change Festival together and getting us all here to have these conversations. And hope to see you for the next one.